Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Ra Noor. I have the great pleasure in welcoming you today to today's webinar, Building Manager Confidence Around Neurodiverse Conversations. I am the director of the ADHD Centre in Neurofocus and a London-based GP. I also teach medical students at King's College London. Alongside my clinical work, I have a particular interest in neurodiversity, supporting individuals with ADHD autism, and helping organisations create workplaces where neurodivergent employees can thrive. Today is a collaborative webinar delivered by the ADHD Centre and Neurofocus. As awareness of neurodiversity continues to grow, managers are increasingly expected to support neurodivergent employees and create neuro-inclusive workplace cultures. Whilst most managers genuinely want to help, many tell us that they feel uncertain about how to approach these conversations. What support may be appropriate and how to balance individual needs with team and organisational responsibilities. At the ADHD Centre Neurofocus, we work closely with neurodivergent individuals, managers, and organisations across a wide range of sectors. One message that we hear repeatedly is that managers want practical guidance and greater confidence when supporting neurodivergent employees. Today's session will focus on practical strategies to help managers feel more confident, support neurodivergent employees, and to explore strategies that give managers the ability to create psychologically safe workplaces, respond positively to disclosure, and create a more effective and well-balanced workplace. By the end of the webinar, we hope that you will leave with greater confidence and have practical ideas that you can apply in every day in your workplaces. So before we begin, just some housekeeping. So the webinar is being recorded. It will last for 60 minutes. Please feel free to submit questions through the session using the chat function. We will answer as many questions as we can. The information shared in today's webinar is for educational purposes only and should not be considered as legal. So who are we? So we are the ADHD Centre and we are neurofocused. So the ADHD Centre is the leading UK specialist neurodiversity clinic, providing expert clinical consultant-led diagnosis and treatments for adults and children with ADHD and autism. Our multidisciplinary team approach includes consultant-led care, a team of psychologists, ADHD coaches, and occupational specialists who work collaboratively to deliver evidence-based patient-centered care in line with the current clinical and NICE guidance and best practice. We are committed to providing high-quality, comprehensive neurodiversity services, supporting individuals with diagnosis, with treatment, with medication, with coaching, and long-term management. Through our national online and in-person services, we have helped thousands of individuals across the UK gain a better understanding of their neurodiversity and access the support they need to thrive at home, in education, and in the workplace. Our clinical expertise and holistic approach places us at the forefront of neurodiversity assessment and treatment, and enabling us to support individuals and organisations with confidence and credibility. Through our clinical work, we recognise that many neurodivergent individuals continue to experience challenges beyond diagnosis, particularly with education and in the workplace. To address this needs, we established Neurofocused, our sister organisation dedicated to helping organisations build neuro-inclusive cultures and to unlock the potential of neurodiverse talent. Neurofocus partners with employers to deliver specialist training, coaching, workplace needs assessments, and consultancy services, helping organisations improve inclusion, employee well-being, engagement, performance, and retention. Building on what I have just said about Neurofocus, so Neurofocus offers organisations the ability to move beyond awareness and create practical, sustainable, neuro-inclusive environments where people can thrive. What makes Neurofocus stand out and is unique is that our training and coaching and consultancy is grounded in specialist clinical expertise of the ADHD Centre. This allows us to combine evidence-based knowledge with real-world experience, supporting neurodivergent individuals. We work with organisations, universities, schools, healthcare professionals to deliver neurodiversity training, workplace needs assessments, coaching, and tailored workplace programmes. Importantly, we recognise that every organisation is different. Rather than offering a one-size-fits-all approach, we work closely with organisations to understand their people, their challenges and their goals, helping to improve inclusion, well-being, engagement, performance and retention. Ultimately, our goal is simple: helping organisations create environments where neurodivergent individuals can succeed and contribute their strengths with confidence. I'd like to introduce the first of our guest speakers, who is Tamra Sillis. She is our Head of Psychology and Coaching. Tamra is a consultant clinical psychologist with extensive experience supporting adults with ADHD and autism. She is a specialist in neurodiversity, workplace well-being and psychological health, and has spent many years helping individuals better understand their strengths, overcome challenges, and thrive both personally and professionally. Tamra brings a unique combination of clinical expertise and practical workplace insight, making her exceptionally well placed to discuss how organisations can better support neurodivergent individuals. The next of our guest speakers is Sophie Halewood. Sophie is one of our experienced ADHD coaches who specialises in supporting individuals with ADHD to better understand how their ADHD can be managed in their daily lives and develop practical strategies and create long-lasting change. Drawing on both her professional expertise and lived experience of ADHD, Sophie has a particular interest in supporting late diagnosed adults, professionals and leaders. Her coach's focus is on well-being, helping individuals build sustainable habits, improve self-awareness and work with their strength. So over to you, Sophie and Tamra. So Tamra's going to go first. Do you want to just come on?
Hello, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to share my screen. And can I just want to check that everybody, that's available for people to see?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is having a think about why managers might feel uncertain about having neurodiversity conversations. I'm going to talk a little bit about supporting performance alongside well-being, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about masking and burnout, and then finish up with speaking about psychological safety, and then I'm going to pass things over to Sophie. So the first thing to say is that, we know this and we hear this all the time, which is that managers generally very much want to support their neurodivergent employees. But what we do find is that sometimes they feel kind of quite nervous and uncertain about doing this. They get really worried about getting things wrong. And we know that some of the sources that relate to this is that sometimes managers or leaders are worried about saying the wrong thing. So we're very, very aware that people become very worried about language or terminology or concepts. And this sometimes makes people feel nervous. The other thing is people sometimes worry about their own kind of level of knowledge and expertise. And so what we find is that some people might feel a little bit more comfortable having a think about, let's say, ADHD or ADD, but they might feel not so comfortable, let's say, thinking about autism. And of course, some people are also, worried that they might not know very much about things like dyslexia or dyscalculia. And so, we'll talk a bit more about this, but really we wouldn't imagine that everybody needs to be a kind of expert in terms of the different conditions, but it's really about rather having confidence to talk about it. We also know that managers are worried about this kind of balance and about keeping things in perspective. So, what they very much want to do is be able to balance support, but also make sure that their employees are meeting the kind of performance outcomes of their roles. And our view would be that really these two can be held really nicely together, and they can hang together really well so that it doesn't have to be one or the other. We know that managers are sometimes kind of a bit worried and uncertain about disclosure. We know that managers sometimes, don't know whether they need to have conversations that lead to an explicit disclosure. Sometimes managers are worried about whether they could even ask about diagnosis or things like that. So we're thinking about that. And then the other one that happens quite a lot in our conversations is that managers are concerned about legal ramifications, about something, if they were to say or do things in a way, would they be in trouble for that? Would this lead to tribunals? Would there be a sort of an escalation of things if they, if there were certain things said and done? And of course, the other thing we know, which is absolutely vital to anything like this, is that organizations have got different cultures. And we certainly know that the cultures that are more open, more transparent, are willing to kind of have these kinds of conversations with curiosity, are better able to do a good job when we're thinking about this. So what we think about is that very often what we would like to be able to create for managers is for people to be able to feel that they can feel confident going into these conversations, rather than feeling that they've got to sort of have sort of clinical expertise with regards to the different difficulties that people might face. The other thing is that when people are given kind of the scaffolding or some really good kind of ideas and templates for these conversations, we find that this is a lot better. Really, support from senior leaders is vital. And what we mean by that is also that there is a sort of open system that possibly managers and leaders themselves have attended training. They feel comfortable having these conversations. And then, of course, the other really important thing is that it's so important to understand that adjustments are really about optimizing performance. So adjustments are not about kind of dropping standards or lowering the bar, but that it's really about giving everybody the best possible opportunity to be able to fulfill their roles and to thrive when they're doing that. I'm going to talk a little bit about supporting performance alongside well-being. And, just a very quick definition of well-being, really, it relates to the kind of overall psychological, emotional, physical, and social experience at work, including their ability to perform effectively, to maintain health, and to feel valued. And especially important is that people feel able to sustain their performance over a longer period of time. So importantly, this is not just about the absence of stress or illness, but really it's about the ability for employees to be able to feel that they can thrive in their workplaces. And of course, what it means for organizations is creating conditions for sustainable performance. And so what we often kind of find, and in our conversations, is that there really are two important responsibilities that can sit rather well alongside each other, which is creating that environment where neurodivergent colleagues can thrive, and also ensuring that there is the organizational performance. And what we really highlight is that the most important things to determine is what is truly essential to a role, whether there can be barriers that could be removed for people so that they can meet the role and the job expectations, and then really importantly, what reasonable adjustments can be made for people to be able to thrive. The other thing just to add is that, of course, there might be times when the needs of an employee don't fully align with the inherent requirements of the role. So an example is, let's say, a customer-facing role where the required skills might be that one would have to respond to unpredictable interpersonal interactions. And of course, it might be further along the line that there might need to be another kind of course of action that takes place here. An example being a change of role within the organization. But importantly, we very much would want for this to be a sort of an end point, and that actually there's so many different things that we can do in the meantime. I'm going to talk a little bit about masking and improving inclusion. And so just so that we're kind of thinking about this. So masking or camouflaging, as it's called, is the conscious or unconscious suppression, modification or compensation of neurodivergent traits in order to meet perceived social norms. And this, of course, occurs because of repeated experiences of social rejection, of bullying, of criticism, of workplace penalties, or of being labeled as odd or difficult or unprofessional. And really importantly, masking understandably then develops as a way of people kind of surviving and coping in the workplace. And so we have different types of masking. So we have social masking, which is maybe the one that that people can relate to, is people feeling very much that they need to kind of force and maintain eye contact. Very often what we find in the background is people are using what we call safety behaviors. So they might be memorizing social scripts. They might be kind of doing things in the background to make sure that they can ensure that they can have some level of social conversation with people. People might also be monitoring facial expressions around them to make sure that they're kind of fitting in and doing the right thing. We also have cognitive masking, which is very, very tiring, which is, you know, constant self-monitoring, checking in with themselves about what they've said. How did that land? Was that okay? Who noticed what they said? There's also emotional masking, again, which is utterly exhausting for people, which is where they feel that they need to hide all sorts of emotions. So where they might be trying to hide feeling overwhelmed or feeling very stressed, they might conceal some of their anxiety. They may be feeling very frustrated or very irritable, but feel that they have to really suppress all of that. And then pretending to understand situations. So although they might actually inwardly be feeling quite confused and not sure what's expected of them, they're kind of pretending to know what might be going on for them. And of course, what we really know is that people then, employees might appear to be high functioning. They may be coming across as if they're kind of coping very, very well. But really what's happening in the background is that they're using enormous resources to simply maintain the appearance of normality. And employees might be able to maintain performance for years, so for long periods of time. But what's not always known to employers, to managers, is that actually there's lots of things that are happening in the background. So people are working much longer hours. They might be working over weekends. They may be having to kind of maintain lots of hypervigilance, lots of personal sacrifice. So we find that very often people start to really suffer in their work and personal lives, because that becomes very unclear as they try and meet certain deadlines. And of course, what this leads to is chronic stress, anxiety, sickness, and burnout. And we often sadly find that people do eventually leave their employment. And importantly, just for us to hold it in our minds, if we think about burnout, burnout also happens on a cognitive level. So what we find is that people are having sort of lots of thoughts about not feeling good enough, not feeling as if they can manage anymore. We also find that the burnout occurs emotionally, which is that people start to feel hopeless, exhausted, defeated, despondent, and have a range of those really strong emotions. And then we also find behaviorally that what we often find is that people might start getting into avoidance behaviors, so not turning up to meetings, maybe not coming into work. And we also find that physically, we also have kind of symptoms of burnout. So that might be also that people begin to feel very unwell. People might develop kind of physical symptoms that might relate to kind of tummy stress, headaches. So things can also manifest in a physical way. And really what we want to do is we want to be able to help organizations improve inclusion, which means that we would very much want for organizations to feel that they can actively accommodate different ways of thinking, communicating, and working. Also that I think for everybody that we challenge the professionalism myth. So many unwritten workplace rules are based on neurotypical norms. So things like speaking without preparation, being able to present really well and with not much kind of rehearsal, being able to network comfortably, thriving and enjoying kind of open office spaces, which of course can be very difficult. And also the idea that everybody enjoys social events, which of course is frankly not true at all. The other big one is to normalize adjustments. So things like flexible working, noise reducing equipment, modified meeting practices, tech support, that all of this stuff is kind of really normal and really quite common in the workplace. The other thing is to make expectations explicit. So this is really, really kind of important. And this is happening, it's happening promptly. It's happening so that you're having kind of regular check-ins with people so that they don't feel kind of confused and anxious about asking things about their work. And then, of course, creating psychological safety within the workplace. So this is the last little bit that I'm going to talk about, is that psychological safety is the belief that people can take risks at work without fear of humiliation, punishment, or rejection. And really what it translates into is that people believe that they can speak up, they can ask questions, they can admit when things have gone wrong or maybe when they've made mistakes, that they can express concerns and that they can generally be themselves without the kind of worry of rejection or punishment. And the concept of psychological safety has been really well developed by Amy Edmondson, who is an occupational psychologist, and is also a professor at Harvard Business School. And so she's done an enormous amount of work on this. And if you were interested, it's really, really useful stuff to have a look at. And so when we create psychological safety, the ways that we can do this is when managers and leaders are modeling vulnerability, that they might be kind of saying things like, gosh, I don't know, or I need help with this. I've made a mistake. I'm going to have to look at that again. Could you help me with that? Also being curious instead of kind of judgmental if people bring things to them. So what we always talk about here is we don't always need expertise, but what we can always get curious about is how something is impacting somebody, because if we can understand the impact of somebody's difficulties at work, we can hopefully have conversations that we can move that in the direction of being able to help employees. Also that there's some predictability where that's possible, so where there can be a little bit more structure. So things like, could minutes be kind of circulated beforehand? Could it be that people could use chat functions so that asking questions can happen in different sorts of ways? So just being able to think about what people might need for that. The other thing is being able to communicate differently. Could people have cameras off? Again, could people use their chat function? The other thing is to create fairness and consistency across the board. And again, that means that, if there are changes, if people are allowed to make changes, that also happens for everybody as well. So that people don't feel as if they're being sort of highlighted because they perhaps have needed some adjustments. And the other thing is to encourage dissent. So to think about things differently, to invite those kinds of responses so that people feel that they can talk up, because they might see things in a different way. They may have spotted things that make sense to them. And we'd very much want them to feel that they can say things like that. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass on to Sophie.
Thank you, Tamara. That was very, very interesting. Can I just check that everyone can hear me okay and see the
we can
presentation
hear you.
okay?
We can't see the presentation just yet.
Okay, bear with me.
Great. We
And
can see
now?
your presentation now.
Excellent. 2 out of 2. Great. Thank you. So yes, once again, thank you, Tamara. That was excellent. Really interesting. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a real area of personal and professional interest for me, and communication is so important in, I mean, every area of our lives, of course, and our work. And I often think, even not thinking about neurodivergent staff or colleagues, how many challenges in the workplace have been caused by not being as clear as we could have been, or potentially misunderstanding something. This is also something that I used to oversee a lot in terms of my previous role as a director of operations at a mental health charity. It's really great that this is being talked about so much more now. So with that, I will continue. So why does it matter? Why does communication matter? I've just said it's so important. Really, it's the thing that can make neurodivergent staff really feel seen, if you like, when it's accepted and part of the workplace culture that we do communicate differently. Processing is often different. It is different in a neurodivergent brain compared to neurotypical brains. And most importantly, of course, this is individual, highly individual. But it's significant, and it will impact neurotypical people at work as well. I certainly feel that sometimes I ask somebody in a coaching call a question, and it's very unlikely they're going to just answer that question in the first few seconds. There's something about processing their thoughts through speech that is quite common in ADHD. In autism, for example, I had an example of offering a colleague a cup of tea once and didn't hear anything from them, and assumed that they didn't want one. And then it felt like absolutely ages after I'd asked the question, she replied and said, "Oh, yes, please." And we had a really open culture, and I sort of said, "Oh, could you not hear me okay when I asked you?" And she said, no, I could. I just had to work out whether I wanted a cup of tea or not. It just takes me longer. And I asked her to tell me more. That was really interesting. Can you tell me more? And she explained that when somebody asks her if she wants a cup of tea, it's not a quick decision. It's rather she is processing by thinking about the act of drinking the tea and that going down the throat and how that will feel, and that will inform. So there's a delay. And sometimes ADHD and autism can clash a bit like that, because certainly myself, I can be very impatient, frankly. And when I ask a question and there's a bit of a delay, I can feel a bit affronted. So this is why it's so important to have these conversations and learn to understand the nuances. Communicating differently, like I said, you can often see in ADHD talking around subjects as part of the processing. Sometimes you might come across somebody repeating themselves as part of the processing. And there are different, sensory and social challenges. So depending on where you're having conversations, this can be significantly important, and external noise. And of course, as I said, everybody's individual and these support needs will vary. And I think Tamara's point about masking just now was so useful, because you will often be working with people or line managing people and have no idea of what's going on for them with the amount of masking that may be going on. So effective communication in neurodivergent world, as in life in general, reduces misunderstandings. And this is really significant because certainly neurodivergent people, I can't speak for that entire community, but I can certainly say that I hear the experience and I felt the experience of being misunderstood. And I think the feeling that a manager or, a line manager or a leader or a director really is really listening to you and cares about how you need to be communicated with will only naturally support performance in terms of that buy-in, in terms of that engagement, in terms of that respect, in terms of that willingness, and quite literally as well, supporting performance in terms of clarity of expectations. And as Tamara spoke about, it's about that building psychological safety, and it will improve well-being. So one of the things that people ask me a lot is about how to feel more confident having conversations. And as Tamara said, it's more about confidence than expertise. It would be unreasonable and unnecessary for all line managers to be experts in neurodiversity. but people worry about saying the wrong thing naturally, or not knowing enough about a particular neurodivergent profile, or being asked questions they can't answer. And I would always urge that move away from assumptions is the most important thing you can do. That's probably the thing that, in my experience, personally and professionally, that people find the most damaging, is when assumptions are made or questions aren't asked. So although it may feel uncomfortable, it's sort of courage over comfort on this one, that you are putting that person at the very centre of their working life by asking the questions, focusing on them. And yes, ask rather than tell. This is also powerful. I think often, leaders feel that, they need to demonstrate knowledge, or they need to demonstrate expertise or experience, and actually it's extremely powerful to share power with somebody that you're line managing and give them the opportunity to sort of to lead with your coordination. And within that, of course, the listening more than you speak, giving people space. And within that, also understanding if somebody does struggle to speak a lot, especially with autism, that can show up. And again, just the helpful mindset. Don't need to know everything about neurodiversity. I need to understand this employee's experience. I could spend hours with you today going through every single neurodivergent profile, and you wouldn't be prepared to meet with a person who is a human being with all sorts of intersecting identities. So it's really about finding out about them from them. And just going back to this idea of confidence, I think really for me, and for many other directors, leaders, managers, when I was in that world, and I think with any kind of meeting, it's about preparation. I'm sure that if there's some kind of contract monitoring meeting, or a contract, or a tender meeting, if you go in without any facts and figures, without any paperwork ready, you're not going to feel as confident in your ability to have a successful meeting. And it's really the same premise. Any kind of supervision or one-to-one work with a member of staff is best when you're prepared, and you know what you're planning to talk about and what you're planning to say. So asking yourself, what's the purpose of the conversation? Have I allowed enough time? And this is important, especially when I mentioned that the processing can be different for neurodivergent profiles. So something that you think, I can get that done in 30 minutes, 20 minutes, that may take longer, and you are potentially opening up discussions that could be quite sensitive. So I always think it's important to have that buffer. Is the environment suitable? So we need to think about, and in the considerations here, sensory distractions, noise, making sure that this space is private. Again, time to process the information. Have I provided information in advance if needed? And this is something that comes up a lot in terms of being able to prepare effectively for a meeting and answer particular questions or explore certain themes. You could find that without that, for certain people, you may end up having a quick meeting where they don't necessarily say a lot, and then the next day you open an email with lots of responses and feel a bit frustrated as to why they haven't engaged, and then followed up like that when you've given them the space to be honest and open. And that's often just because of the way that information is processed. And for some people that can be very, very quick who are neurodivergent, and for some it's much slower, and they do really need that time. Again, opening up potentially conversations about sensitive issues, potentially around performance, potentially around reasonable adjustments or other support. The scaffolding is really important. So having tools that you're aware of, or I think even more importantly, signposting. So really knowing what your organisation offers to neurodivergent employees, and what those pathways to support are, and any signposting that you can give them to particular reputable websites, any peer support groups within the organisation, stuff like that. You certainly don't need to know everything about neurodiversity, but it certainly helps to be able to say, here's these opportunities or these areas of support. I think that really demonstrates a level of care and willingness to support the person. This is another really important point around responding positively to disclosure. And not only is it just incredibly important, it's probably quite likely to come up. Sort of statistically speaking, you are probably likely to be line managing or working with somebody who has no idea that they're neurodivergent, especially women around my age. I spent many, many years in the working world, really struggling but not knowing why, till I was diagnosed with ADHD at 37, and you're seeing this more and more in terms of autism and ADHD particularly. You may have staff who have been diagnosed with dyslexia earlier in life or dyspraxia and then are questioning whether they potentially are autistic or have ADHD once this knowledge that's being shared, thank goodness now, means that people are questioning, and women are in particular experiencing, greater symptoms around perimenopause. So you may well experience somebody coming to you and saying, oh, no, I'm struggling with this. I think I might have ADHD or autism, or telling you that they do. And this is so important because you're potentially, I'm not trying to put the pressure on here, but you are potentially in a position to really make a big difference to what happens next for that person. And I certainly had, in my own experience, some absolutely fantastic responses. I had some incredibly unhelpful responses. And it's the unhelpful ones, I have to say, that I remember the most. And none of them were from a place of wanting to be unkind or dismissive. They were just from a place of not knowing what to say and having a lot of stereotypes, excuse me, rather than learning and knowledge about ADHD, for example. So it's about, what do we do? So thanking them for sharing, acknowledging that it's taken trust, listening without judgment, of course, and asking about what support helps, being quite practical, in terms of the next steps, what you're going to do going forward. You're really sort of, holding space for someone, creating that safety, as Tamara said, around psychological safety. Somebody's being very vulnerable in this situation. And literally lines to you. So thank you for telling me. How does this affect you at work? What helps you do your best work? And let's explore what might be useful. It's always useful to think about what to avoid as well. And there are some comments here with the crosses that I hear a lot in when I'm coaching or from other work I'm doing. So this really unfortunate sort of statement that I hear so much is everyone is a bit ADHD or a bit autistic. They're not. They may lose their keys sometimes, or they may fixate on new exciting things, but we're not all on a spectrum. The autistic spectrum exists, but we are either neurotypical or neurodivergent, and the neurodivergent experience will vary a lot, but this statement can feel very, very minimizing. You don't seem autistic happens a lot, this statement, because people associate autism with Rain Man or other very extreme examples. This is especially the case for women with autism, for whom there is relatively still less understanding of how it presents. You've always coped before. This can be tricky for people who are asking for reasonable adjustments, potentially when they've worked somewhere a long time, or I've never have known. And then asking more really personal questions about medication, for example, without laying the groundwork for that. Then making assumptions about abilities, potentially reducing workload without even a conversation, or not offering opportunities for development. Like I said, this can, through just through not knowing rather than willingly doing harm, be very harmful. And discourage future disclosure, minimize their experiences, and damage that trust in the working relationship. Some really common mistakes to avoid. I'll just get through these. So number one, assuming one size fits all. By our nature as humans, we do that quickly, don't we? We risk assess and we put things in boxes. We think, oh yes, that person's told me that they have dyslexia, therefore they need printouts on yellow paper rather than white paper. We have to ask about the preferences and the experiences. They being vague, really very difficult for neurodivergent people. Being clear and specific around tasks or deadlines is also really important in terms of accountability as well. There could be a risk of overloading with the information as well, like giving too much information or really big conversations that are a bit overwhelming. That again could be from a place of wanting to really do a good job, but it's sort of also maybe thinking, can we have more than one meeting and make them shorter? Relying on verbal communication or only email, this is really tricky. So for many people with who are neurodivergent, they have very different working memory to neurotypical people, and this can mean that you ask somebody to do something in your head that you've asked and that's happening, and they've said, yeah, that's fine, and it's gone quite quickly. Or sending, for example, feedback in a long email for somebody who potentially struggles with rejection sensitivity, which is sort of an increased emotional response to perceived criticism or judgment, could feel really difficult for them, very, very viscerally difficult, and would have been potentially better by a quick meeting or a phone call and then a follow-up with an email. Focusing only on challenges is also problematic. Naturally, this does veer into the world of reasonable adjustments and accountability and stuff like that, but there are some incredibly talented people who are neurodivergent, and we can't lose the how are we going to support them to develop, not just to tick the probation box. Just jumping back to the assuming one size fits all, another really important thing is that for many people who are neurodivergent, you may ask them, what do you need? From a place of genuine, let's put you first, what do you need? And they may not be able to answer you. And that does not mean that they don't have anything that they need help with, or they don't care. It's just that they really don't know what could help them. So it's a fine line between assumptions and tailored support. So it is useful to have awareness of what can help and be able to explore that. It's also important in terms of knowing what your organisation can offer, so that we're not setting somebody up to identify something that's completely impractical. We need to ask people how they want to be communicated with, okay? And that may feel onerous. It may feel like, we're busy people, we'd rather just, get this out, but it's going to save time on misunderstandings and issues later. Processing time, I've mentioned before, is really important. The structured agendas, the follow-up notes, and it's a simple, how do you prefer information to be communicated? And it can be revisited at any time. Finally, effective feedback. Bearing in mind what I said earlier about being specific. So as with all feedback, specific, timely, balanced, clear, action-focused. Think about if you were receiving feedback, what would be important to you? And I'm sure all of those things would be. And general responses are problematic. So I've been told before, many years ago, you just need to be more organised. And all I heard was, you're not doing a good job and you're not good enough. I did need to improve my organisation skills, but that comment didn't give me anywhere to go with it, because I didn't even really understand what was being challenged, like what was wrong. And I didn't have any sort of support to identify how I could deal with that. I mean, it was about 15 years before I was diagnosed. I think it would be different now, but still, the comparison here, 3 project deadlines were missed this month. Let's look at what's getting in the way and identify support that could help. I could have worked with that, definitely, and it would have stung less. So we're focusing, like I said, observable behaviours, being solution focused, avoiding assumptions, and being mindful of rejection sensitivity. I mentioned this briefly on the last slide, but this is very, very important. People, particularly with ADHD and some with autism as well, may experience quite significant emotional responses to feedback, and it's something that they certainly need to be aware of and learn to be aware of with the right support. But it certainly means that sometimes the way you give feedback is really, really important, and it's good to have that open dialogue with your direct reports. Anyway, I shall finish there, and I will hand back to Dr. Noor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie, and Tamra. Thank you, Sophie and Tamra, for both your insightful presentations and your wealth of knowledge. So we're going to start the Q&A session now. we've got our first question, which is, as a manager, I sometimes worry about saying the wrong thing when someone discloses that they're neurodivergent. What's the best way to respond?
Sophie, do you want to?
Yeah. So I think really the most important thing is building that psychological safety. So thanking them and acknowledging the trust that it's taken to share that with them. And then start a sort of a gentle conversation, even saying, no, we don't have to cover all of this now. We can, schedule another meeting, but please let's discuss, what might be helpful for you. And yeah, really just approaching this from a place of curiosity. As I mentioned, avoiding assumptions at all costs, but also being aware that they might not have all the all the information about what could help them. They also potentially in a vulnerable position in terms of questioning whether they are neurodivergent. And so just to be, really mindful of not accidentally minimizing it. Even if you're surprised, and you might well be surprised that a couple of people that I disclosed to were so surprised, and their surprise made me think, oh, maybe I don't. And I think probably made my journey to getting a diagnosis longer. Yeah.
Tamara, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with what Sophie's saying, which is I think that almost the guiding light has to be around curiosity. I think that we don't even know it sometimes, but I think we live with so many assumptions, and we've almost concluded about people. I guess if we are around people, we might kind of feel that we know them or that we know things about them. And I think, the biggest thing is to just sort of, try and sort of hold off. And it's really about asking kind of questions to get more information. And I think doing that kind of respectfully, collaboratively, also that somebody doesn't feel as if they're being sort of completely interrogated, because I think sometimes people think they're being helpful because they're wanting to get information, but I think sometimes that can also feel really uncomfortable and difficult.
Definitely, it's having those conversations and leading on from that. How do you have the conversation if you're a manager, there are existing performance issues? How do you approach the performance issue and balancing that with an existing or a suspected diagnosis of either ADHD or autism or other neurodiverse condition? I think, Sophie, you covered this a little bit in your presentation. Do you want to expand, and then maybe Tamara can add a bit more?
So I think it's, as Tamara said in her presentation, it's just, reasonable adjustments, for example, that more, formal way of looking at this doesn't remove accountability and it doesn't lower standards. And I think it's about having that clarity from the very beginning. And often what I see and where things go wrong is that support for neurodivergent staff start at the point that there are performance issues, not from the point that they gain employment. And there's no discussion potentially in the in the recruitment stage even. And so I think real clarity on what the expectations are from the get-go. And then I think just when you're having, performance management conversations, it's about identifying not so much, the diagnosis doesn't really matter. It's the experience of the person, so it could be in terms of executive function, memory, and so on. And there can potentially be some quite quick wins, but it's really about that person knowing what's expected of them and being able to reflect themselves on, why that is challenging for them. And I think a lot of managers that I've worked with have worried about this and struggled and sort of gone the extra mile and then the extra mile and then the extra mile again, trying to make this work. And really what's so important is to make sure that a neurodivergent person has access to the kind of support they need to really understand that. Like, for example, ADHD coaching, for example, because there needs to be, that collaborative way of working together. And we would often assume that neurodivergent people know what's going on or know what they need, but often they can be quite in the dark and it can be really early stages. So I think scaffolding around ensuring their support, but really, maintaining a focus on what are the absolute non-negotiables of the job and how we get there together.
Thank you, Sophie. Tamara?
Yeah, again, I would say very similar stuff, which is, I guess maybe the bit I would also highlight is that, when as coaches and psychologists, when we're working with our clients, very often they are aware that there might be stuff going on at work, that maybe they're struggling with things. So I also think as a manager, it's really useful to remember that they are probably quite anxious, maybe don't quite know how to bring it up. And I think that having conversations can be really containing for both sides, because it almost means that there's an opportunity to be able to really think about things together, because very often, employees have become very, very worried. And of course, the thing we find is that they often also jump to conclusions, which is that, if they found out because they haven't met deadlines, they worry very much sometimes that the worst thing is going to happen. And I think it's really helpful to know that there really are phases and stages, and hopefully this is a kind of collaboration that can occur. And the only other thing I wanted to add as well is that sometimes workplace adjustments are in place. So let's say people are, they have access to tech support. I think what's really important is to also ask about things like that, because we work so often with people where money, let's say, has been spent. They feel terribly guilty about this, but actually they haven't been able to use the support because there might be something about it that is just not totally making sense or isn't working for them. So I think it's just about, I think we must also be careful that we think, well, if somebody's got adjustments, that somehow then, it must be going really well, because sometimes there are problems with some of those adjustments as well. So it's really useful to open all of those conversations up. So that you can really get a sense of what's happening on the ground for people at work. And again, not just assume.
Great, thank you for that. So I suppose leading on from that, Tamra, what does a psychologically safe conversation actually look like, and how would you approach one?
I mean, I suppose I would imagine that I really think that one of the most important things is that, the manager or the leader having that conversation. I think there's something about modeling vulnerability and safety. Because I think, whether we know it or not, we are sort of giving out something about ourselves. And I think that employees pick that up, long in advance of any of these kinds of conversations. And I think that if they see that actually, as a manager or as a leader, that you are genuinely interested in your team, interested in how people, how do they learn? How do they understand things? Just again, being open about the fact that, even if we are leaders and managers, we also sometimes have difficulties. I think also just that disclosure around that can be very, very good. I think just, that I would really want to kind of consider that we stay away from anything that is punitive or critical or punishing, or that kind of communication or behavior, which is just sort of top down, where there is no real attempt to kind of open things up and understand it. And I also think, Sophie raises such important things around just the way in which we have these meetings. I had an example recently of a client that I was working with where he was working in a bar, and whenever his manager raised issues about his performance, they would be having these conversations in a really loud area of the bar. And of course, he just wasn't able to actually engage in anything like that. So I think it's also, as Sophie was highlighting, just some of those really considerate, practical things that you would also set up in advance of a meeting like that.
Great, thank you. And Sophie, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just echo it, and I think with the caveat of the preparation, if somebody needs something beforehand, in terms of an agenda, that can make a big difference as well.
And a lot of organizations already have some neurodiversity policies and procedures in place, and they might have done some learning. How can Neurofocused add to the existing knowledge base of organisations, and how can they actually practically help organisations?
Sophie, do you want to go, or shall I?
You go first, Tamara. I've done lots of chatting. You go first.
So have I, but yeah, I'm happy. No, so well, so the neurofocused kind of pathway for us is first of all, is really exciting. You know, what we're really wanting to do is also be able to think about a variety of contexts, but also think about the kind of lifespan. So thinking about input at schools, at university, at colleges, and then also in kind of workplaces, in companies. I think that a lot of what we're wanting to do is, of course, there's some psychoeducation. There is information that we want to be able to give you. There's some information relating to the law. So some of this is quite formal, but I think what we're very much wanting to offer is also kind of real life scenarios, be able to really practice things like role plays. Really what we want to be able to do is to give anybody who is in a kind of leadership or a management position, it's really about helping you with confidence around this. As we keep saying, it's really not about having a sort of level of clinical knowledge about this, but it is so much about being able to assist you to be able to really, first of all, understand exactly the context in which you're working, the demands that are placed on your employees, and then helping you to find ways to have these conversations. Because really what we are completely passionate about is kind of making sure that we're holding on to people in workplaces who have got fantastic talents and skills, but unfortunately, they're often kind of, you know, very stressed by their performance, and we want to be able to hopefully kind of create that that kind of togetherness and the teamwork for everybody to be able to kind of work in a much more sustainable way together.
Sure, thank you for that. And Sophie, just one last question for you. So, as an employee, how can you approach your manager if you're having difficulties? It's a very difficult, conversation to have. What's the best way to do it without causing, well, I suppose your manager to lose confidence in your ability, or to add to the stigma?
Yeah, so I suppose some of this would, of course, depend on that relationship with the manager. And again, that's why what Tamara said about that, that modeling of, vulnerability, or being able to share power, know when you don't know something. So if you feel you have trust in your line manager, that's really important. You are effectively, yes, you're going to feel vulnerable, but also you're not. It's not that unusual, and this is what I hope is really coming across now, and why the neurofocus work is so important. Is awareness is growing so much, and any organisation who has leaders should be providing this kind of intervention in terms of educating them. But it's also thinking about what you need from that. So what are your sort of hopes that will come out of it? So thinking about that, maybe writing those down, potentially reaching out to, if you do have like a neurodiversity peer support group, which are becoming more popular, reaching out to them for any advice, potentially looking at any policies you have in your organisation that may talk about how to disclose, but also thinking you don't need to have all the answers either. Like we said earlier, it's not about an interrogation where you give up this bit of information about yourself and therefore you have to give up everything else. Your story is your story, and you kind of give that over as you're ready to. So yeah, I think thinking about what you want to get from it, and certainly I would always encourage disclosure, because of the opportunity then for the support that you absolutely deserve to do your job.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And I think Tamara mentioned before, it's about being prepared. So approach the conversation be prepared before you go to it. It might be that you haven't got your diagnosis yet, and you're still waiting, either have a chat to your GP. There are lots of free resources out there. There's organizations like us. So if you find it difficult to get the assessment on the NHS, private organizations are available for either assessment or coaching or support. I think that brings us to the end. Thank you both for your insights, and thank you to everybody for joining. One of the things that I'd like everyone to take away, and I hope that the key message that we wanted to give, is that it's not about being neurodiversity experts. It's about having those conversations, conversations between employees, between employers, and it's coming to that agreement and recognizing that our individual traits, that our individual needs, they're what brings growth to an organization. And when you recognize an individual's ability and see them for who they are, and you build on those strengths, that's when organizations and individuals, they'll thrive by working together. The recording of this webinar will be available on our website, and we'll also send it out to everyone who participated in about a week or so. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to reach out. We'll also share lots of free resources as well. And thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar.